We are not talking here about, what should I call it? Merely murder. We're talking about people who are involved and interested in torture, horrifying torture of the people we know are now dead, and many more yet to come.
The alleged Gilgo Beach serial killer Rex Heuermann has been called a monster, a human devil, even a cannibal. He's accused of killing 6 women in horrific ways and suspected of even more. On the 1-year anniversary of his arrest, with new accusations coming out once again, we'll take a look at 5 shocking updates in this case and talk with forensic scientist Jennifer Shen about these strange and disturbing details. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. It's been a year since a then little-known Manhattan architect, Rex Heuermann, became the man known around the world as Long Island's suspected Gilgo Beach serial killer. And since his arrest last July, the murder charges against Heuermann have doubled, searches of his property have yielded massive amounts of evidence, and prosecutors say he plotted his kills in a detailed manifesto. And just recently, he was accused in 2 more murders, and his own daughter has been implicated for posting some very disturbing and graphic images, or allegedly posting. We'll talk about that. Now, it's been a minute since we've talked about Rex Heuermann and the Gilgo Beach case, so let's discuss some updates with you right now, and we're going to start with the arrest itself and what is really remarkable police work that made this possible. On July 14, 2023, after a 13-year cold case investigation, Rex Heuermann was walking down a Manhattan street when police arrested him in connection with the murders of 3 women.
I'm standing here with my law enforcement partners in the Gilgo Task Force to announce the indictment of defendant Rex Andrew Heuermann, 59 years of age. And he's been arrested by the Suffolk County Police Department's homicide detectives, and he's been indicted in a grand jury presentation by the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office for the murders of Melissa Bartholomew, Megan Waterman, and Amber Costello. These young women went missing between July of 2007 and September of 2010. They were found in December of 2010 by the Suffolk County Police Department, and then there was nothing, absolutely nothing. For the next 13 years, their cases went unsolved until today.
Heuermann was charged the next day with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of second-degree murder. All of the 6 charges, they carry a sentence of up to life in prison. Heuermann pleaded not guilty to all the counts. He has maintained his innocence. But then we go to a half year later, and he was charged again, this time with killing 25-year-old Maureen Brainerd Barnes, whose remains were found near the other 3 women. And those women became known as the Gilgo Four because their bodies were found within a mile of each other along Gilgo Beach on Long Island's South Shore. And there were many similarities among them, too.
They were buried in a similar fashion, at a similar location, in a similar way. All the women were petite. They all did the same thing for a living. They all advertised the same way. And there were immediately similarities with regard to the crime scenes. All the women were bound at the head, at the midsection, or at the chest, and later at the legs. The other thing I think that's been talked about in the media was they were bound by burlap.
But those 4 women were only the beginning, because just this past June 6, came another announcement.
We're here today to announce additional charges in the case against the defendant Rex Heuermann. The District Attorney's Office filed a superseding indictment charging the defendant with 2 additional murders. Those charges pertain to the 1993 murder of Sandra Castilla and the 2003 murder of Jessica Taylor.
Now, there was something different about these women, the 5th and 6th bodies that were found, because unlike the Gilgo Four who were bound, these bodies were dismembered. Only the head and hands of the women were found on Gilgo Beach. Here's the really remarkable thing about the police work in this case. The rest of their bodies had been found years earlier, 40 miles away in the town of Manorville. But there's at least one more body and one more amazing bit of police and investigative work in this case. Heuermann remains the prime suspect in the murder of Valerie Mack, whose remains were also dismembered, scattered between the same two locations, the brush east of Gilgo Beach and the woods of Manorville. Mack had never been officially reported as a missing person. Investigators were only able to identify her remains after being given the green light to use genetic genealogy. So investigators in at least 3 other states where Heuermann had ties, they are also examining cold cases for potential connections, some dating back to the 1990s. And there's something else that is very interesting in this case, and that is the way the investigation started, because it was back in 2010.
Yeah, there's somebody after me. I'm sorry? There's somebody after me. Where are you? There's somebody after me. Okay, where are you? There's somebody after me. Where are you, ma'am? I don't know. Are you driving right now? No, I'm inside the house. I'm sorry? I'm inside the house. What house? I don't know. Can you show me where I am? I'm sorry? Can you show me where I am? No, I can't. What's your callback number you're calling from? Huh? What phone number are you calling from? Somebody's after me. Please. Are you in Suffolk County or Nassau County? I'm in Long Island. Where on Long Island are you? Hey, we're supposed to No. 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 No, stop, no.
Suffolk County Police released that 22-minute 911 phone call from 24-year-old Shannon Gilbert the night she disappeared in 2010. And during the early morning hours of May 1st, Shannon traveled to meet a client. She called 911 when she believed she was in danger. She was found deceased. And the crazy thing is that she was not one of the women that Heuermann is suspected of killing. But it was while searching for her that police uncovered the remains of Melissa Barthelemy, one of the original Gilgo Four. Then they found the other 3, which pointed them to a possible serial killer. Again, Heuermann has not been charged in connection with Shannon's death. It was declared an accident, though I should tell you her loved ones do believe she is one of his victims. Now, she was a sex worker like many of the other women and around the same age, so you can see why people are making the connection. And Heuermann has been accused of living a double life. In the years from 2010 and maybe even earlier until Rex Heuermann's arrest last year, he was apparently believed to be living a double life. As a New York City architect, he commuted to Manhattan each day from Massapequa Park, a suburb on Long Island, where he lived with his wife, Asa Ellerup, and their children, Victoria and Christopher. His wife, Asa, filed for divorce shortly after his arrest and then revealed she was fighting cancer. And not surprisingly, his indictments and the horror of the charges against him are said to have turned this family upside down. But what was it, just last month? His family, specifically his now adult daughter, Victoria, came into the spotlight. Why? Because an accusation surfaced that she might not have been totally unaware of Heuermann's darker side, as laid out by John Ray, who's an attorney that represents the families of some of the Gilgo Beach victims. Victoria, according to him, may have had some connection or at least interest in her father's alleged obsession with brutal murders.
Rex Heuermann's porn is matched by his daughter's tastes, his daughter's work. These people are in our society. They're cannibals. They're monsters. They're human devils. They're evil. The Heuermanns are part of that package.
So yeah, in a press conference on June 13th, Ray spoke to reporters and essentially accused the alleged serial killer's 27-year-old daughter, Victoria, of posting these very graphic images to social media. Most are way too disturbing to show you here, but he presented them to reporters and described them as quote unquote evidence. Ray's team seems to be trying to make the connection between Heuermann's apparently deviant lifestyle and the culture that his daughter was allegedly immersed in. He says the images could implicate Rex Heuermann's family members, especially Victoria, in his crimes. But to be very clear, there is no evidence whatsoever that substantiates that, and no even evidence that substantiates that those online pages, those Tumblr pages, are even actually Victoria's. So I want to make that very clear. Now, with all that being said, and with all that background, let's talk with forensic scientist Jennifer Shen about what is a very disturbing case. Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on. Police, they've collected a mountain of evidence, thousands of leads, even well before Heuermann was arrested. How do they even go about processing all of that evidence?
Well, serial killer cases, especially ones that have gone on, killings that have gone on for decades, provide so much evidence. And each time they find a victim, it's a unique crime scene with its unique evidence. So the thing that investigators are trying to do is connect all of the evidence from all the different scenes. So when you get a scene like this and you have so much overwhelming evidence, you just have to set out a plan. You start, for instance, with the cell phone and the electronic data, and you start from one end and slowly work your way to the other. One of the things that's very, very important about these kinds of cases is that you work them independently so that there's no transfer of evidence between the cases. So you want to be extremely careful in a laboratory setting. For instance, if you're looking at trace evidence, hairs, fibers, that sort of thing, that there's no way that you can transfer evidence from one set of evidence to another, from two different scenes. Because when you find specific evidence at each different scene location and they are the same, for instance, if you find the same fibers or the same hairs, you can connect the bodies, connect the scenes, and then eventually connect to your killer. So it's very tedious work, and it has to be done extremely carefully and with a very good plan in place.
And from a legal point of view, it's so important, because if you have a defense attorney that can point to an instance where there was cross-contamination or there was something from one victim's case to another, that presented to a jury can be really problematic, okay? But there have been some very interesting forensic findings in this case, and I mentioned a lot of them. But for instance, you have partial remains of one woman that was found in 1996. The rest of her body wasn't found and identified until 2011. Then DNA testing linked her to an unidentified baby found on Gilgo Beach. So how is that done? How does that speak to the quality of the police work in this case? Because it was going on for so many years.
Well, when you have someone who's adept at getting rid of bodies and either burying them, hiding them, or dismembering them and putting the body parts in different places, it makes it extraordinarily difficult on the police, which of course is why they do it. So in this case, you were able to find a portion of the victim many, many years ago, and because the rest of her was buried somewhere else, it just took a long time to find those body parts. As far as connecting them, that was the other thing. In the 90s, DNA was just sort of coming to the forefront. We were able to really do a lot with DNA, but you needed a lot of material like blood or semen or saliva, something significant that you could see. Now we're at the point where we can look for wear DNA. If someone has worn something or touched it very long, we can get their DNA. And to your point, we can do the genealogical testing where we can look for certain DNA markers, compare it to a database of people, and then do a bunch of research and come up with suspects. There are so many things that we can do now that we couldn't do then. We can get DNA out of hairs. You get one hair and you can get a DNA profile. And that was used in this case. So what we can do now, it's extraordinary compared to what we could do back in the 90s and the early 2000s.
And does that make this challenging forensically? So yes, there's certain information we might not have known earlier on because of limited technology. Obviously, we're living in a different day and age now. But what are some of the challenges that are confronting the forensics team in this case?
Well, honestly, the challenges facing a lot of DNA units in particular is the overwhelming amount of work. So many of your labs are state labs or local labs. They're paid through taxpayer funding. And in order to keep up with the amount of work that they have to do on cases that are continuing to happen, it's extraordinary. And then you go back and you work a case like this. So the first real problem is that you would have to dedicate a couple people to cold cases in order to get that work done. The second one is that you're dealing with evidence that's very, very old. So sometimes it's lost. Sometimes it hasn't been packaged properly. Sometimes it's just not in a condition that we can still use it. in this particular case, they must have done a great job because they were able to get the DNA out of those hairs that were found in the bodies years and years ago. And that's really extraordinary forensics and extraordinary police work.
Talk about reliability, though, with this, because remember, investigators, they get the DNA from the pizza crust, right, from Rex Heuermann, and they say it's a close match to hair that was found on the victims' bodies. And then only a few months ago, when Heuermann was charged in the death of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, investigators say that the hair found on her body is similar to the DNA from his wife, Asa Ellerup. So if this is presented in a court of law, how strong is this? Do you think that this kind of evidence, this forensic evidence, would hold up?
I really do. And the thing about forensic evidence is that there's investigations that are done, and you look at cell phone data, you look at email traffic, and you're looking at internet use, but then you have this forensic evidence, and it adds. It's like pieces of a puzzle. Like, here's a hair that belongs to him. Here's some hairs that belong to her. She's in his environment. Here are some eyewitnesses that saw the car. Here are some cell phone records that connect him to the victims. And when you add these things piece by piece by piece, it becomes an overwhelming picture eventually of who the suspect is. And that is how most of a serial killer type cases are cracked and then investigated and presented to juries, is by taking these very small pieces of evidence that might not mean that much all by themselves. But when you add them to 10 other pieces of evidence, pretty soon it's an overwhelming picture and makes it a very strong case.
Is there a smoking gun, you feel, in this case? Or is it, like you said, it's just a collection of everything all together? Or do you look at something like, the alleged search history of him and say, why was he looking so much about the Gilgo Beach serial killer and things like that? And obviously there was torture porn, and you could say, well, maybe he's got a weird obsession. Maybe he had an obsession with serial killers, but I don't know. Is there something you look at this case, you say, they got him dead to rights. This is the smoking gun here?
What's interesting to me in this case, and this is the other thing that's happened in the last 5 to 10 years, we are so exceptionally good at getting information out of electronic devices. I think in this particular case, he thought he had erased all of this evidence. You can't erase things. I tell my children this all the time. If you put it out there, it's there forever, So we were able to find, in this case, we were able to find so many things that would connect him sort of motive-wise to these cases and then connect him directly to the victims. But to me, you have all of this, which is very, very strong. But when you add the sort of the killer's guide to how to do this, the planning book, so to speak, of all the things that you should do next time to make it better for you, like, what size should the victim be? How should we dispose of the body? Things to remember, how to plan. That to me was like icing on the cake.
And to be clear, when we mention his family, it's been reported and it's been alleged that they were out of town when he allegedly committed these murders. But as I mentioned, you have somebody like John Ray, who's seemingly trying to make a connection between Heuermann and his other family members. I'll be very clear, and I'll be honest, I don't see anything that connects any of these family members to even knowing about what had happened here, or allegedly had happened here. And just because, you have a piece of hair from his wife that has a connection to the materials that were found, or her DNA is matched to what was found at the crime scenes, or you have his daughter purportedly looking up these different images, I don't think that's enough. Is there anything from your point of view that investigators might be exploring or might be feeling there is some sort of connection between the family and this alleged serial killer?
It's a really interesting question. I have a couple thoughts about that. First thought is that the family always is looked at because I think it's really difficult for any person to think that their loved one, whether it's husband, wife, child, could have done all of these things for all of these years and you just don't have any idea. So there's always that suspicion, whether it's warranted or not. As far as the hair goes, belonging to the wife of the serial killer. So the bottom line is, there's transfer evidence that is very, very, we see this all the time in these cases. So for instance, if you have a dog that sheds a lot, you may transfer your dog's hair to a victim because you have dog hair on your body or on your clothing or on your blanket or whatever you might be using. The dog obviously didn't commit the homicide. It is evidence that relates back to the killer's environment. And that's what I think. The wife's hair relates the victim's evidence back to his environment. So that doesn't mean, to me, that means nothing about whether she was involved. As far as the daughter goes, I don't think any of us really can understand what it would be like to grow up with a person who can do these types of murders. You don't know what psychological effects that could have on someone. Don't have any idea how they might, try to let that emotion out or be interested in what makes, their environment, their psychological environment the way it is. So I think it's way too much to assume that the daughter had anything to do with the killings.
Right.
I don't think it's too much to assume that the daughter's going to have some significant psychological trauma from being associated with her father and all that he did.
And to be clear, when we say he did, I mean, he's innocent until proven guilty. These are allegations.
That is true.
The evidence appears really strong from our point of view looking at it. He has pleaded not guilty to all the murders, currently being held at a correctional facility. It is estimated that, and I don't see it happening, but you tell me if I'm wrong, it's estimated that the earliest this case could go to trial is next fall. Do you see it happening? Do you think that's enough time? What do you make of it?
Well, yes, I do. It is extraordinary how difficult it is to get all of the investigative and forensic ducks in a row, so to speak. It takes a long time. This work has to be done so carefully because you cannot rush it, and you cannot produce anything but the very best work, because this is important. This is someone's life at stake, and it's all of these victims' families. You have to do your very best to make sure that everything you do is perfect. So that takes a while. It takes a while to get results back. It takes a while to do the DNA. It also takes a while to get it all organized into a coherent case. So I'm not surprised that it's going to take that long. I will be surprised if he winds up actually going to trial. I think that there will be some sort of plea before then. That's my own personal opinion because of what I've seen over these many years, but that's what I would guess.
It's an interesting take considering his lawyers, his legal team, and him have been very adamant that he is innocent, that he did not do this. So, we shall see. It wouldn't be the first time that you have a criminal defendant say that and then ultimately take a plea deal, but we'll see. Jennifer Shen, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.